As you're progressing through your supervised fieldwork, periodically you may want to conduct a fieldwork review. So in a fieldwork review, we're going to be looking at both the total number of hours that you've completed towards your goal and the percentage of unrestricted hours that you've completed towards your goal. So this is one of the ways that you could conduct that review. And now there's other ways that you could conduct the review. This is certainly not the only way to do so. I also want to say if you're already using a Ripley's Fieldwork Tracker or a system like that, you might find that the data is already there and you're really comfortable and you know exactly where in your progress you are. But sometimes it can be helpful to kind of do another assessment, look at the data another way, spend a little bit of time on it, and this will really help you have some confidence that you're moving in the right direction or identify any areas in which you might need to change your plan or you might need to address some problems. So I do recommend conducting a fieldwork review periodically throughout your fieldwork experience. As a part of the review process, go back through your documentation and make sure that you have a monthly verification form signed for each month of supervision. It's important that each of those MVFs was signed by the deadline, and the deadline is the end of the month following the supervision. So for example, if you had supervision hours in March, that MFV needs to be signed by the end of April, the following month. It can't be signed a day after that. It must be signed by the last day of the following month. And you need to make sure that if you've had multiple supervisors, that you have a final verification form signed by every supervisor that you've worked with. So if you've changed supervisors, you'll have a final verification form signed by them. So there is a deadline for the MVFs of the following month after supervision. There's not a deadline for your final verification forms. It doesn't have to be done the following month. Sometimes it can take a couple of months to compile all that data and to get those final verification forms. But you do want to have one if it's been a little while since you worked with a supervisor. If you've taken a break, an extended break, you want to have a final verification form finished and signed by that supervisor. So you have one for each supervisor. If you've only had one supervisor, then you'll only have one final verification form. And I do want to point out it's the final verification forms that are submitted to the board, not the monthly verification forms. But you do need to have all of these saved in your documentation. You want to have them really easy for you to access, make sure they're there and available. Now, a monthly verification form cannot be changed once it's signed. So they are set once they're done at the end of the following month. So you want to keep that in mind as well. You can't ask a supervisor to go back and do a new one or to change the previous one. So you want to make sure you have one for each month and that it's signed within the correct timeline, within the deadline. I recommend conducting a fieldwork review a couple of times or even more throughout your fieldwork supervision experience. I recommend conducting a fieldwork review after 700 hours or a little bit more than that of fieldwork. So when you've completed about 700 hours of fieldwork, it's a really good time to see where you are in your progress and see if there's any things that you might need to switch up in your plan, any problems that you need to solve, that sort of thing. I would recommend additionally after another 500 hours, so about 1,200 hours or a little more into your fieldwork, then that's when you're going to want to do another one. And then as you approach the end of your field work, kind of towards those last 100 hours, do another review so you know where you sit and where you stand, and you can really be paying attention to all of the important details that are required. But also if you've had multiple supervisors, after you've finished with your second supervisor and pretty much after every supervisor after that, if you have multiple supervisors, I would conduct another review so that you can compile all of that data together. The process of conducting a fieldwork review is a good time to review some of the requirements for supervised fieldwork. So you're going to want to review the requirements for the type of supervised fieldwork that you're completing. So whether you're completing the regular schedule of supervised fieldwork or the concentrated schedule of supervised fieldwork or some combination of both, there are some things that apply to both schedules and some things that work out for each one. So regardless of the schedule of your supervision, you're going to need to make sure that 60% or more of your fieldwork is in unrestricted hours. There is not a requirement that 40% be restricted. It's not a 60-40 balance. It's 60% or more of your hours need to be unrestricted. So you want to be thinking about that. That's the mass majority, and that's really important regardless of your schedule of fieldwork. You also need a signed MFE for every month of fieldwork, regardless of your schedule of supervision, and you need that signed final verification form for every supervisor. Now, some of the differences are that if you're conducting regular scheduled supervised fieldwork, you're going to need a total of 2,000 hours. That means at least 1,200 of those hours need to be unrestricted hours. So you're really working towards that 1,200 or more minimum number for unrestricted hours, which means you are not going to document any more than 800 restricted hours. When you get to 800 restricted hours, you want to stop recording that field work. You do not want to document more than 800 restricted hours, because if you do, that's going to mean in order to get that 60% of unrestricted, you're going to need to complete more than 2,000 hours, right? Because it's going to throw that percentage off. So you really want to make sure that you stop documenting restricted fieldwork hours at 800, and you want to see as you're doing your review where you are in that number and how close you are to that maximum number of restricted hours, or you're going to have to get a total of more than 2,000 hours in order to get that unrestricted percentage, or you might have to discard some months of fieldwork. If you're doing a concentrated schedule for your supervision, you need a total of 1,500 hours, and that means at least 900 of those hours need to be unrestricted hours. That means no more than 600 of your fieldwork hours can be restricted. So you really want to pay attention to that. 600 is the maximum number of restricted hours if you're doing a concentrated fieldwork schedule. And if you're doing a combination of regular and concentrated, you're going to have to do the math there so that you know the maximum number of restricted hours for you to maintain that 60% of unrestricted hours, because you don't want to end up having to do a lot more total hours in order to get that 60%. And that's what happens for a lot of people. A lot of people end up doing a lot more restricted hours, especially early on in their supervision, and they work in a placement that gives them lots of restricted hours, but they exceed that restricted hours, and it gets really hard to get to that 60% balance. So you want to be tracking, and when you get to that maximum number of restricted hours, you want to stop documenting it. It doesn't mean you can't work in the field and perform those duties, but those duties are no longer documented as field work as a part of your progress towards certification. So you really want to pay attention to that and make sure that you do not exceed those, or then you have to adjust your percentages and you have to adjust the total number of hours. If while conducting your fieldwork review you discover that you have exceeded the number of restricted hours that you can complete in order to make your 60% percentage, there are a couple of things you can do. One is you can increase the total number of fieldwork hours that you do so that you are able to match that 60% and you're able to raise that number. But it means those extra months you do are going to be all unrestricted. Another thing you can do is look to see if you need to go back to some of your months that maybe were very high restricted and very low unrestricted and discard those months of fieldwork. And you can do that. You cannot alter a single month, so you can't just throw away some of the hours from a month, but you can discard an entire month's worth and take out that monthly verification form. That may mean that you need to ask a previous supervisor to revise their final verification form. Final verification forms can be revised, monthly verification forms cannot. So if you need to write a supervisor and say, I'm no longer going to be using the February month because it threw off my balance of restricted and unrestricted, and I'm asking you to sign a new final verification. Sometimes that's one way to problem solve it and reduce your overall numbers, reduce your percentage of restricted so that you're just working on completing the unrestricted. Now you may just decide that it's not that far off of balance, and so you just do a few more months of unrestricted until you get to that balance. There's some different ways that you can problem solve if you are out of balance and you're less than 60%, and this is something that you want to do in combination with your supervisor as a part of supervision, as a part of the process. You guys can problem solve this together, make this a collective, cooperative experience. For the people that I supervise, I want it to be something that we work through together. I don't want it to be a problem that you feel like you're out there trying to figure out on your own. And we try to really avoid having this problem altogether, but it does occur sometimes, and particularly when you've had multiple settings and multiple supervisions, and you can kind of just get off track in that. So there's some ways that we can problem solve this, and one of those ways is to discard an entire month or more of field work. But you don't want to do that without really talking through with your supervisor and determining if that's the right course of action for you, and making sure that you're meeting your supervision goals and you're meeting your fieldwork goals. To conduct a review, you're going to want a monthly breakdown chart, and you're going to want a total fieldwork hours chart. And you're going to start by reviewing your monthly verification forms for each supervised month of fieldwork. Then you're going to record in your monthly breakdown chart the supervisor's name. If you had multiple supervisors, you don't have to have that column if you didn't have multiple supervisors. And then you're going to want to record the total hours for each month of supervised fieldwork based on your monthly verification form data. Then you're going to want to review your fieldwork tracker for each supervised month of fieldwork. Record in the monthly breakdown chart the totals for restricted and unrestricted fieldwork for each month included in the chart, verifying that the total of the fieldwork matches your forms. Then you're going to sum the total of your restricted and unrestricted fieldwork hours, and then the total of your fieldwork hours all together, and you're going to record that in a totals chart. You're going to review those totals, and if you have less than 1,200 unrestricted fieldwork hours, 900 if you did concentrated fieldwork, you will need to accrue additional unrestricted fieldwork. So if you've got less than 1,200 unrestricted fieldwork hours, you're not going to hit your 60%. So you will also then calculate the percentage of unrestricted fieldwork hours, and you'll record that as well. Then you're going to look at two alternate possibilities. So A, if the percentage of fieldwork hours is 60% or higher, and the total of fieldwork hours is 2,000 or 1,500 if it's concentrated, then you've met the requirements. Or B, if the percentage of unrestricted fieldwork is lower than 60%, you're going to identify which months of fieldwork have the lowest percentage of unrestricted fieldwork and see if you need to discard those. You will then need to evaluate the number of additional fieldwork hours you need to complete until you have reached the minimum of unrestricted fieldwork hours, which is again 1,200 for regular and 900 for concentrated. And then you will have met or exceeded the 60% unrestricted fieldwork. Again, you're going to identify this information. I'm not saying you discard them yet, but this is giving you data to have this discussion with your supervisor. And then you're going to meet with your current supervisor to review your chart and evaluate your current status, set goals for completion of your field work or to problem solve if you need to. You're going to discuss what it would look like to discard a month of supervision or to add additional months and how many months that would be. And then you just really want to make sure you're documenting everything. What's your first month of supervision? What's the final month that you've done or the final month you anticipate your supervision being done? The more data that you have as you collect it, the better decision making you're going to be able to engage in. So this is really valuable just for that decision making process. You want to really document and record all of the data that you can that's relevant and necessary to help you see where you are in the process and what else you need to do to reach your final goals. As behavior analysts, we love data. We engage in decision making utilizing data. In fact, we don't engage in decision making if we don't have sufficient data, right? That's what we do is we collect our data. And so I want to encourage you to engage in that same practice as you review and evaluate your progress towards the completion of your supervised fieldwork experience. So engage in some behavior analytic practices, conduct a review, gather data, and then use that to make good decision-making processes going forward. I think that can help reduce some of the stress and the sense of overwhelm that we can have as we're working through this process. It's okay to be a little overwhelmed and to get a little confused, and so this is a good way for us to stop and make sure we have clarity and we know where we are and where we're going. I want to wish everybody the best of luck in your fieldwork experience, and I hope that you have really good supervision support and that this experience is positive and leads you towards the start of a great career. My name is Esther DeWitt. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst, and I'm a licensed behavior analyst in multiple states. I hope you found this training helpful.